Now it's my honor to introduce our next guest speaker, Kellyanne Conway, who serves as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Counselor. She has led some of the administration's most high-profile and impactful initiatives. Kellyanne will give us a look inside some of the administration's efforts over the past 2 years and some of their biggest accomplishments. Please join me in welcoming Kellyanne Conway. I brought you some water if you'd like some.
Oh, that's lovely. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, Kellyanne, we are so delighted to have you as a part of our proceedings this morning. You know, I have to tell you, I don't think I've ever seen any presidential administration open the door more for access for local government than the Trump administration has done. I know that over the last year, I think you had something like 35 different forums.
Yes.
Where you literally invited every county elected official in America to come in and meet with the president's administration, with cabinet secretaries, with speakers that just had tremendous information to share. And I think I was a part of the last delegation that came in. I know you were a big part of a lot of those efforts in a lot of those meetings. California, Alaska, and Hawaii, I think, was the last group that came in October, and we were honored to have the president himself come in and talk to us for about 20 minutes. But Kelly, tell me, what has been the feedback from the administration, the cabinet secretaries, and the others that have had a chance to meet with county officials? What has this meant to the administration?
Well, thank you so much for having me today, and to everybody at NACo, to have me at your conference. We could not do what we do and be who we are as an administration literally without the input and the insights, the information, and really just the individual participation from our local elected officials and non-elected officials. Why is that? Because much like everything to President Trump, it all begins at the grassroots level. And he's been a chief executive his entire career, obviously, at the Trump Organization as a successful developer and builder. Chief executive on TV, he'd like me to remind you also, at The Apprentice, and now chief executive of the United States. But at the executive level, it's always been very natural for him to rely upon different individuals and organs, if you will, throughout a structure to make sure that he's provided with the information and the issues and the input. And he's very good, I think, about weighing many different opinions and then making a decision, executing on the decision. So we're the federal government. This is the White House. He's the president. It's wonderful that he's bringing voice and visibility and action on so many different issues, but we will never, let me make very clear to you, we will never substitute our judgment for yours. And the reason is we need to hear, we need you to be a two-way conduit to bring to us what you're hearing and what you're seeing and experiencing at home, locally, and then hearing from us what's happening. So a couple things that have happened, you know, everything from tackling the opioid crisis legislatively and through regulation, big bipartisan effort on criminal justice reform, infrastructure has begun but will continue. We hope and we expect in a very bipartisan way, in earnest, this very Congress this year. Also, you look at anything having to do with, let's just say, the Water Resources Development Act that was signed into law in October, the FAA reauthorization in October. So these are things that maybe the average American doesn't hear and doesn't see in local coverage, but you know it and you feel it. And I just use those as some examples where we just can't make decisions on high and expect everybody to comply with them. We're receiving that input. It took me 50 years to get to my 50th state. When I had turned 50, I got to but I've been to all 50 now. It took the White House about a year and a half to have all 50 states come in and send their representatives, and it's been an incredible, important part of our own infrastructure, our intelligence and information infrastructure. Some of the best ideas that we have heard have been the best practices, and yes, the challenges, the obstacles and the opportunities that we've heard from local elected officials. I can think of some right off the bat, but we did have 35 events, all 50 states represented. The president was there for a few of them. I think I participated in 27 of them, and the president came in at the last one for the crowning achievement. But I'll tell you that as different geographically and demographically and sometimes economically some of the states are, we do hear so many common threads of those obstacles and opportunities, and we want to continue to hear them.
Well, one of those common threads was just talked about by Secretary Acosta, and that's the whole opioid crisis that I think is affecting just about every county across the United States. And I know you've played a very significant leading role in the administration's efforts to deal with the opioid crisis, including some significant legislative initiatives that have been put in place, some regulatory changes to help local and state government officials address this crisis. Can you talk a little bit about these efforts and any next steps that you're aware of that you can share with us at this point?
Yes, sir. Greg, thank you for helping us to raise awareness, not just about the crisis, which we call the crisis next door, but some of the solutions that we're working on together. So we refer to the opioid and drug demand, drug supply crisis in the White House as the crisis next door. So right off the bat, people know a few things. One is it is indiscriminate. It goes across every geographic, demographic, socioeconomic, racial, gender, certainly political line. And I can't imagine there's a person in here who comes from any nook and cranny in this country that has not seen the impact of our modern drug crisis, which experts say is the worst drug crisis in our nation's history. So what's being done about it? Well, we had H.R. 6 last year. It was signed into law by the president in October. And it really was a great exercise in bipartisan legislative efforts for a couple of reasons. One is it was passed on a bipartisan basis. Every single Democrat who voted in favor of H.R. 6. And that includes every single Democratic senator, including the ones running for president. So I feel like this is an issue that we'll continue to hear about at different levels because everybody's already admitted it's a problem. It's a problem that affects everyone in this country, and they put their vote and their voice behind that problem, solving that problem. Secondly, the H.R. 6 ended up being a package of different bills that had been out there on different aspects of the opioid crisis. Everything from the STOP Act, for example, which now will require our own U.S. Postal Service to do what the third-party carriers like FedEx and Amazon and DHL already do, which is write down the sender, recipient, and the contents of the package of every foreign origin package. So that should be able to cut down on the number of illicit lethal drug packages that are coming through our own mails and into our communities. H.R. 6 also included some great programs like more funding and awareness for the NAS babies. So neonatal abstinence syndrome, an issue that our First Lady, Mrs. Melania Trump, who just went on a 3-day tour, just left to talk about her Be Best initiative, which includes in the forefront the opioid crisis. The NAS babies, you've probably seen 1 in 100 babies being born every day struggling to take those first breaths. The 1 in 100 approximates about 150 a day nationwide. The 1 in 100 is about 1 in 10 in some counties that I visit, and we've heard from those legislators right, left, and center, particularly at the local level. There's money in there for that. There's also some workforce development monies, and our Secretary of Labor, I missed his remarks, but I certainly am working with him and his team on this issue. The Secretary of Labor and the Second Lady and our Surgeon General and I had a wonderful opportunity to go out to Belden Industries in Indiana last fall and witness firsthand a really great example of an employer. They're a manufacturer of big coils. Great example, and I know there are others in your own communities, of an employer, Greg, that instead of saying you failed your drug test, you're out of here. You can stay on the job, but you must immediately go into treatment and also either be reskilled or take a pause in that job. And then when you are able to re-enter, that job is waiting for you, because after all, the job is the pathway to recovery, along with medication-assisted therapies and so many of the other treatment services that are in H.R. 6. So H.R. 6 came with billions and billions of dollars But I think most significantly for you, in addition to the money, it was a full spectrum approach on law enforcement, interdiction and surveillance, treatment and recovery, prevention and education. And I think what all of you can do, which we also do at the federal level, is have a really robust triple down effort on Take Back Day. So National Take Back Day is the last Saturdays of April and October. We have another one coming up in about 6 or 7 weeks. The 3 Take Back Days that have existed in this presidency, along with our efforts to make, quote, everyday Take Back Day, has netted 3.7 million pounds of pills since we've gotten here. And I want you to think about that. Just get your head around that, because I work on this every day and it's hard for me to get my head around. Had you told me 3.7 million pills, I'd be impressed. It's a lot of pills. 3.7 million pounds of pills, which tells you how much of this unnecessary stuff is in our supply chain. Exactly. So, and part of the prevention education is the National Take Back Days. The tech companies have been terrific in helping us. ONDCP has been terrific. They have now ODMAP, overdose map. You can see the hot spots in your communities. Google, Facebook, they've been helping us to come up with tools so that you can put in your zip code and find the closest place to bring those drugs, those unnecessary drugs. And the prevention education also has to be with the consumers, the students in the schools. We spend an awful lot of time and money teaching our kids, our school students, about many different things. Getting this into their curriculum or getting a local leader to go in and just tell them the basics. Fentanyl, make sure they know what fentanyl is. Make sure they know what naloxone and Narcan are. And fentanyl is instant killer for many people. It's being laced into marijuana, heroin, meth, cocaine, and of course street drugs. And it is the biggest reason that the opioid crisis continues to spiral upward in the deaths. And then I would just point out, because you may or may not have this in your own communities, but increasingly when we travel, we see many of our fire stations re-outfitting themselves as places where they can save a life. Somebody who's overdosing, safe stations, they are 3-4 times more likely in some places to respond to a drug overdose than a fire. Exactly. So we have that as well. What's next? I think what I call the opioids plus responses are coming up. More workforce development, making sure that these folks, not unlike the criminal justice reform, the First Step Act, trying to get folks who are qualified to re-enter. More money for the drug court programs, the drug-free communities programs this year. We had the highest number of recipients and most money ever awarded to the communities. Also, I would say the veterans piece, working very closely with the VA, because in our rush to make sure our veterans have everything they need, we're handing them 2 bottles of pills for non-combat related injuries. And it's tomorrow the president will sign an executive order on suicide prevention in veterans, and this is a piece of that as well. So again, working with you and your communities, I've learned 98% of what I've learned about the opioid and drug crisis from you, not from the federal government. We're here to help in the response, our whole of government response, but that whole of government response is a vertical whole of government. It's federal, state, and local, but it's a whole of government response that really needs to treat the whole person.
Well, you kind of made reference to criminal justice reform, and that's the next thing I want to get into. Obviously, there's been success with a number of packages, including county priorities and reauthorizing the Second Chance Act. Counties, as you well know, play a very significant role in criminal justice. So we own 91% of the U.S. jails with over 10 million inmates every year. And many of our jails continue to struggle with individuals' mental health and substance use disorders and frequent recidivism. I know in our county in San Diego, and probably in most county jails across the United States, our jails, unfortunately, are the largest provider of mental health services, in addition to many other things. But could you tell us a little bit about the White House work on this issue, and what are some of the big achievements that we've seen so far from the administration's perspective?
Well, thank you very much for pointing that out. And I had this very conversation with your supervisor, actually, from your county not too long ago on these 2 issues. The First Step Act, another great bipartisan accomplishment, both Republicans and Democrats. And I think more importantly, people from all across the country came into the Oval Office to watch the signing of that legislation. Local leaders who have been working on this for years, certainly people in the criminal justice space, the health community, those who were about to benefit from this. And one of the First Lady's guests was Matthew Charles, probably one of the first and among the most visible now. beneficiaries would be the word, of the First Step Act. I think it's very important to recognize what measures like this provide and what they don't provide. It is not a get out of jail free card for everyone. This is when people have paid their debt to society and they are determined to be ready for reentry. It is giving them that opportunity. Now, this is something that had been attempted and talked about for many, many years. And I think it's a very good example of will, of putting the politics aside and wondering who's going to win, and seeing that many people who deserve to win would win. But we know that it is on your shoulders to execute now on measures like the First Step Act, the criminal justice reform, the opioid legislation, the regulations, obviously. And we're here to support those efforts. I think that the workforce development piece on criminal justice reform, the mental health piece, is what SAMHSA is doing. Over at HHS, they freed up a bunch of money for this particular purpose. They freed up a bunch of money for veterans for that particular purpose. And always making sure that the substance abuse and mental health, even the foster care pieces, all work together so that we recognize the reality of all the different knitting together. None of this can operate in a silo. I think the workforce development piece is important too. I took note and shared with Jared Kushner, my colleague at the White House, who really took control of this issue on behalf of the administration, that I noticed that Sully, the service dog, who of course famously was assigned to President George Herbert Walker Bush, God rest his soul, Sully's trainers in part were two convicts. That's the way they referred to themselves. I watched them be interviewed. And part of what they did while in prison was train Sully. And what a great way of showing what can be done for skilling and education and workforce development while in prison, and then when one is qualified to, is ready to come out and re-enter. So there are a number, I think, of protective measures in there, but there are also a number of opportunities. And that was signed into law December 21st, so it's fairly new and young. But again, I think just tackling issues, I mean, people ask me what surprises you about the White House, and I've been there since day one, and yes, we'll continue to be there. One is how small the West Wing is. It's a very small place. But number two is not how easy, because none of it is easy, but almost logistically speaking, how simple it would have been for some of these issues to be tackled previously. So that is not a criticism of any previous administration, any previous president. I'm just making the point, looking forward together, that whether it's a regulatory change or a legislative fix or an executive order or a commission that gets started or a state, local, and federal effort being done together, we just have to do it. Sometimes it's a matter of will. And I am amazed sometimes when I say, and the president will constantly ask, so do we have to do this through legislation? Can we start it here? Can we do an executive order? Can we bring people in? And it is amazing how much you can do if you don't care who gets the credit for it. But it's also amazing how much you can do if, unlike in Washington, we all recognize what you recognize back at home, which is stop overestimating how much can get done by this Friday, and stop underestimating how much can be done in the next 3 weeks to 3 months to 3 years. And that's the way we're trying to tackle issues like that. It's certainly worth a try. Always willing to fail, always willing to say it's not time yet. At least if we can do the work and get it ready and then find out, where it's ripe. So we know that you've got many challenges on your shoulders and on your budgets, but we are here to help, and we are here to support, and we are here, most importantly, I think, to listen.
Well, Kelly, and one of the priorities of President Trump has been regulatory reform. And I know that I had the opportunity, I know there was a few other people in this room 2 years ago this week, in fact, to be invited to the White House when the president signed an executive order on the waters of the United States to send it back to the drawing board. Counties have been, focusing on that issue for a good number of years because of the impact it has on our farmers and our counties, just on infrastructure-related issues and public safety. So we sincerely appreciate all of those efforts to streamline the regulatory process and increase consultations with local governments. Are there more regulatory streamlining issues that you'd like to share with us?
There are. Our head of OIRA is now about to get her confirmation hearing, well, actually the vote. She's now been nominated to replace Brett Kavanaugh in the D.C. Circuit Court. But she left She's leaving a great staff, and she'll have a replacement soon. But under, I think, Naomi Rao's leadership with the White House Counsel's Office and others in the administration, and particularly the president, the deregulation, getting rid of the duplicative, excessive, burdensome, unnecessarily expensive regulations is something that we hear every single day from farmers, property owners, taxpayer, public school parents, certainly local elected officials. So this is not about doing away with regulations that are protecting our safety, our well-being, our water and air quality, but quite the opposite. As you say, the borders of the United States, the president will still mention that as a top 5, top 10, whenever he's asked what are your favorite accomplishments or what were the best deregulations. We very recently had an event in the Oval where we had a coal miner there, we had a farmer there, we had a small business owner there, really just trying to show the broad impact of the deregulatory agenda. But we can always do better too. The president has set as a goal a 5% reduction, I believe it is, across each agency. Some are able to do it faster than others. But there are always, and actually his goal was 2 out for every 1 in, and it's much better than that. Some people say 25 or so, but I'll just say it's much better than 2 gone for every 1 in. Every agency is different. But I think if you look at labor, you look at Department of Transportation, you look at EPA, SBA certainly, Interior, agriculture, these are ones that spring to mind in terms of really having a robust projection about what more they can do in this next year or 2. All the while, and I think it's important too, I've been urging everybody who's involved with this issue, don't just talk about the ones that we're eliminating, but talk about the ones that are new also, because we do need smart regulation, we certainly do. And so when we talk about 10 out for every new 1 in, let's also make sure everybody knows what the new 1 in is and what the purpose of that is and why, because more often than not, we're responding to what we've heard or seen or been told at the local level, the state level also, as to what's important. So the deregulation is going to continue to be a very important aspect of this administration's policies and this president's legacy. Look, it's saving billions of dollars, but I think also it's just restoring more freedom. It's giving people more choices. We hear from folks that they feel more free now to form the small business formation, the confidence. The property owners don't fear as much. Certainly the farmers, those in ag, manufacturing as well. I think the president is the first to say that yes, the tax cuts were great, they were historic, the repatriation of the wealth, reducing the corporate tax cuts, et cetera. But he always says, if that hadn't gone with the companion deregulation, it wouldn't have meant as much to so many. And he also says he thinks the deregulation is just as important, if not more important, to certain industries and sectors and individuals. And he knows that because he hears that.
Well, Kellyanne, this has been marvelous. I know
For
the time
me.
is just kind
Thank
of
you.
blown by, but we sincerely thank you for being here. We didn't even get a chance to get into the question of infrastructure, but I can say, I think on behalf of all of our NACo members, we know that that's an issue that the president is interested in focusing on, and perhaps even though there's a divided Congress, that's an issue that can really bring people together.
Well, we're very hopeful about that, and I'll just spend 20 seconds on it without running into the next speaker's time, because it's so important. When the president had a phone call with Speaker Pelosi about 5 or 6 weeks ago, he immediately tweeted out, "Great call with Speaker Pelosi, and we've committed to working together on drug pricing and infrastructure." And so that was amidst the other things they were discussing, very much on her mind and his mind. And I can tell you at the White House, our 5 policy priorities this year, those are 2 of them. And the drug pricing and infrastructure, I know that you all have a hand in those as well. Infrastructure is everything from rural broadband to shrinking the permitting time from 8 to 10 years to 2 years. Certainly the roads, the bridges, the water main breaks, things people aren't even really thinking of every single day. But infrastructure, at its heart, is a fundamentally local issue. And I know that your members here are charged with the control and the funding, by and large, too, and the maintenance of roads and bridges and streets and parks. And so we hear you, we see you, but that is the next big effort. And I know people like to say, oh, is it infrastructure week again at the White House? I know it's a snotty question. My very professional answer is yes, because every week is infrastructure
There you go.
week.
Good
because
answer.
every week you're dealing with it back at home, and we're partners with that and you. And it's good to have a builder in the White House when you're talking about infrastructure week. So thank you very much, and thanks very much for having me today. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Well, thank you.
You represent a beautiful part of the country, I can tell you that.
I really sincerely appreciate it. I think you're a hit.
Thank you very much. Thank you.